This is take 6.
I defy anybody to find the record unless it's some old blues record in 1922, the first pop record, where I had this electric acoustic guitar and it would feed back, and the little intro which goes is the first feedback. I claim it for the Beatles.
In a time before digital effects, and with only a handful of tracks, the Beatles, armed with ingenuity and a desire to push boundaries, used primitive, everyday 1960s recording technologies to create some truly groundbreaking sounds. Prior to the mid-1960s, most bands aimed simply to reproduce live recordings in the studio.
In those days, there was no technology like there is now. I mean, there was 2 guitars, bass and drums, and that was it. If we did stuff in the studio with the aid of recording tricks, then we couldn't just reproduce them on stage. Like nowadays you could do Tomorrow Never Knows, have all the loops up there on a keyboard, kind of emulator stuff, and you could have as many piano players and drummers and orchestras, whatever you wanted. But in those days, that's it. We were just a little dance hall band, and we never really thought of augmenting ourselves.
One of the Beatles' greatest technological contributions was the reimagining of the recording studio as a creative instrument, and we will explore each trick they used in this video. So back to feedback, and once the Beatles had discovered a new trick, they were not adverse to recycling it. 3 years later, from I Feel Fine, John used the same effect at the start of George's It's All Too Much. Up to 1964, EMI studios were still equipped with basic 2-track tape machines with valve-based recorders, but the Beatles, together with their producer George Martin, soon pioneered ways to bounce down recordings from one track to another, layering complex vocals and instruments to create a sound far beyond the machine's initial capacity. Looping is now a commonplace technique in modern music production. However, back in the 1960s, it was mostly avant-garde composers like Stockhausen who used them. But this was all set to change with Tomorrow Never Knows. Here's a loop of Paul laughing, sped up to sound like a seagull. Another loop of an orchestral chord in B-flat major. A sped up Melatron. And finally a sitar, again sped up. Reverse or backmasking was only discovered accidentally by John whilst recording I'm Only Sleeping for Revolver.
The spool of tape of the rushed mix of the backing track to I'm Only Sleeping, and he didn't realise because the tape was tails out, and they just stuck it on a reel, and he put it on his tape machine and threaded the tail in forward and got it backwards. That's when he came in the next day and said, "Oh yeah, backwards." And then we made him turn the tape over and play it backwards, and we all played, I think John and I, or Paul and I, played guitars, just like random notes on the guitars. And then we turned the tape back over to see what we had. And that was like the first time we ever backwards solo.
John tired very easily, and faced with the onerous task of recording and matching his vocals a second time in order to achieve a thicker, denser sound, he challenged George Martin and EMI's engineers to develop a technique to make this easier. Engineer Ken Townsend developed ADT, artificial double tracking, also known as automatic double tracking.
If I took the output from the sync head of a J37, which is excellent quality, superb quality, and I then took the replay head, and I took that off and fed it into a BTR2, and if I fed that at 30 inches per second, that would shorten the length to about 1.5 inches. But not only that, I thought, well, if I then put that onto frequency control, I can adjust the speed of the BTR2 to be almost exactly the same as the two. And I've got two signals. One is the original signal, and then the same original signal, but delayed by about 100 milliseconds, I think, if it's 1.5 inches out of 15 inches per second. And then that delay, and I can put the two together and see what it sounds like.
Varispeed allows the producer to change the pitch and the tempo. It was used for the first time on Rain, which originally was recorded at a much faster tempo and then slowed down to create a dreamlike, almost hypnotic quality. Varispeed really came to the fore when it was used on Strawberry Fields Forever, where it was used to unite two performances recorded 10 days apart with different instruments at different volumes, in a different key and in a different tempo. John wanted to use, to begin with, Take 7, recorded at 90 beats per minute in A major.
Let me take you down, 'cause
which he then wanted to combine with Take 26 in C major, recorded at 108 beats per minute. Let's listen to both these two takes together at their original speeds.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry.
And the final version with Varispeed, enabling both takes to become a single cohesive track that we all know and love today.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Field.
Direct injection was yet another innovation. During Sgt. Pepper, Paul's bass was plugged directly into the recording console, bypassing the amplifiers. Direct injection provided a more consistent, cleaner bass sound than miking amps. Jeff Emmerich and engineer Ken Townsend also plugged John's guitar directly into the EMI recording console. This was done by overloading the console's mic preamps to create the extreme fuzzy distortion which John demanded. This is why the guitar sound on the faster version of Revolution sounds so abrasive and in your face, more so than on any other Beatles track. The Beatles were quick to embrace new musical instruments to help create lush, layered soundscapes. The Melatron, invented in England's second largest city, Birmingham, in 1963, was basically a primitive early forerunner to today's samplers. Manfred Mann can lay claim to be the first pop group to use the Melatron on semi-detached suburban Mr. Jones, whereas the Beatles used it best and to most devastating effect on Strawberry Fields Forever, where its dreamy, flute-like opening is the song's defining feature and went on to inspire many a progressive rock band. The Beatles would also use the Melatron on Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, Lucy in Sky with Diamonds, Flying, early versions of Across the Universe, and, somewhat surprisingly, on the continuing story of Bungalow Bill, where none of the Beatles are actually playing Spanish flamenco guitar, but John is simply pressing a button on the Melatron for the intro. By 1969, the Beatles were experimenting with early synthesizers. Whilst both the Monkees and the Doors had previously used the Moog synthesizers, it was used to best effect on Abbey Road, where it was used to add subtle textures to such tracks as Here Comes the Sun. Innovators to the very end, it seemed rather fitting that technology was used to convert John's lo-fi cassette demo of Free as a Bird to a fully fledged Beatles recording. Producer Jeff Lynne and engineer Mark Mann used advanced 1990s audio restoration techniques to clean the cassette. Digital noise reduction and equalization techniques were applied to minimize hiss and hum whilst preserving John's voice and his original piano performance. At the time, isolating audio elements from a mono cassette was extremely challenging. The team had to balance noise removal with maintaining the natural quality of John's performance. Here's the original demo. Once John's demo was restored, the three surviving Beatles recorded their own parts at Paul's studio. Technology played a critical role in synchronizing these new elements with John's fixed vocal and piano. MIDI sequencing and click tracks helped ensure the band's additions stayed rhythmically tight, even though John's original performance occasionally varied in tempo. The use of Pro Tools, an emerging digital audio workstation at the time, allowed the engineers to edit and splice sections with precision, something that would have been nearly impossible using purely analog methods. That brings us almost bang up to date with the use of MAL, Machine Assisted Learning, a neural network designed to demix mono recordings into clean, separated stems, used to create the final ever Beatles single, Now and Then, released in 2023. Once more, John's voice was extracted and cleaned up from the original demo to perfect audio clarity.
I know it's true. It's all because of you.
The Beatles' use of recording changed how artists approached the whole art of recording. Multi-track layering, tape effects, and electronic instruments became standard practice. Producers and engineers gained newfound recognition as creative partners and collaborators, not just technicians. Albums were no longer just collections of songs, they became immersive experiences. Countless musicians from Pink Floyd to Radiohead cite the Beatles' technological innovations as foundational to their own work.